Welcome to the Enchanted Archives, where folklore meets forgotten history, and the past refuses to stay buried. This is a space where ancient legends, eerie truths, and unexplained mysteries are brought back into the light, one tale at a time. They say words have power. The right words, strung together in just the right way, can move nations, inspire revolutions, and breathe life into the darkest of fears. But what if words could do something more? What if they could curse? What if reading the wrong poem could mean your untimely demise? In the heart of the Middle East, among the ancient scrolls and manuscripts that have survived the sands of time, there exist verses so feared that they were locked away, never to be spoken. One such text, written by an unknown scribe in the Abbasid era, is said to have driven scholars to madness. In the 9th century, during the reign of the Khalifa al-Mu'tad, a Baghdad-based poet known as Ibn al-Rawandi, a philosopher and skeptic, wrote a collection of verses questioning fate, destiny, and divine justice. One particular poem, known only as the Verses of the Forsaken, was reportedly so blasphemous that anyone who read it aloud would meet a swift and unnatural end. The first recorded victim was the poet's own apprentice, who was found dead in his quarters only hours after reciting the poem to a group of intellectuals. His cause of death was unknown, his face frozen in terror, his hands clutching his throat. Over the years, copies of the poem surfaced, only to disappear again, often after someone had met an unfortunate fate. By the 12th century, all known copies had vanished, burned by fearful scholars who refused to let the curse spread. But the Middle East is not the only place where words have carried death. Deep in the archives of Al-Azhar University in Cairo, scholars whisper about a manuscript known as the Weeping Verses. Written by a mysterious poet during the Mamluk period, sometime between 1250 and 1517, the collection is said to contain some of the most sorrowful elegies ever written. So sorrowful, in fact, that those who read them often found themselves consumed by despair. In 1492, a young student named Yusuf discovered the collection buried in the library's restricted section. Fascinated by its melancholic beauty, he began translating and studying it in secret. Within weeks, Yusuf became withdrawn. He stopped attending lectures. His classmates described him as hollow-eyed and trembling. He claimed that the poet was speaking to him, not metaphorically, but literally, whispering, pleading, laughing. One rainy night, Yusuf walked into the Nile and never returned. His sandals were found on the bank, neatly placed side by side. Over the next several centuries, similar stories surfaced. One scholar claimed he could hear weeping while reading the text. Another said the margins of the pages would sometimes bleed ink, like veins swelling with emotion. The last known person to study the verses was Dr. Samir al-Hakim in 1978. He was found missing from his office, the manuscript open on his desk. His final notes ended mid-sentence. To this day, neither he nor the manuscript have resurfaced. Some say the verses were absorbed back into the library. Or perhaps they're simply waiting for someone else to listen. I'm Ahmed Mansour, and this is the Enchanted Archives. Not all cursed poetry was born in the deserts of the Middle East. Some emerged under the grey skies of Victorian England. Thomas James was a little-known poet in 19th century London. Born in 1828, he spent most of his life in obscurity, plagued by bouts of depression and rejection from the literary elite. In 1862, he self-published a small volume of poems, most of which were ignored. except one. The poem, titled simply The Last Embrace, told the story of a man who lost his beloved in a fire and could not bear to live without her. Melancholic, lyrical, and steeped in the themes of despair, the poem had an uncanny effect on those who read it. Not long after a reading at a local literary club, one of the attendees, a young man named Edward Price, was found dead. He had taken his own life, and a handwritten copy of The Last Embrace was clutched in his hand. Soon, others followed. Another poet broke off an engagement and disappeared. A publisher fell gravely ill. A young woman, known to have recited the poem to her classmates, died under mysterious circumstances just days later. Rumors of a cursed text spread like wildfire. Eventually, authorities seized the remaining volumes and ordered them destroyed. Only fragments remain today, a few verses scribbled in a collector's notebook. No one knows where the full poem lies or if it still survives. But those who've read the surviving lines say the words still sting, still pull, still whisper, and they wonder. Was it the grief that cursed the poem, or the poem that cursed the grief? Across the world in Japan, cursed poetry has taken on a life of its own. One of the most notorious is Tomino's Hell, a modern poem with ancient echoes. Written in 1919 by Saijo Yaso, Tomino's Hell tells the story of a young boy named Tomino who descends into a haunting underworld. The poem is filled with vivid, cryptic imagery of sorrow, isolation, and torment, and it's written entirely from the perspective of a child consumed by grief. Though haunting in its own right, the legend surrounding the poem didn't take root until decades later. In the 1970s, a rumor began circulating among students in Tokyo. If you read Tomino's Hell aloud, you would suffer a horrific fate. One story told of a teenage girl who performed the poem for a school talent show. She fell unconscious the next day and was hospitalized for weeks. Another tale recounts a man who recorded himself reading it aloud as part of a YouTube challenge in the early 2000s. His account disappeared, so did he. Of course, skeptics dismiss these as urban legends, but many still avoid reading the poem aloud, not because they believe in curses, but because they aren't willing to test them. Because sometimes it's not about belief, it's about caution. In 1965, a rare book dealer in Paris named Henri Lavigne stumbled upon a leather-bound volume at a street market near the Seine. The book had no title, no author, only a single poem tucked in the center, written in faded Latin, with a chilling inscription: "Do not speak these words, or you will find damnation." Lavigne, a skeptic, took the poem home and read it aloud that same night. Within days, he developed a severe fever. His neighbors reported strange noises coming from his apartment. Chanting, coughing, sobbing. When he recovered, he refused to speak about what he saw. The book vanished soon after. Some believe it's locked away in the archives of the Bibliothèque Nationale. Others say it was bought by a collector who has since gone mad. But no one has dared publish the sonnet's text in full. A few lines have surfaced online, but always fragmented, always incomplete, as though the poem itself refuses to be copied, as though it knows it should remain unread. We've looked at cursed poems across centuries and continents, but we have one more story, perhaps the most terrifying of them all. A modern poem composed not by a forgotten mystic, but by an artificial intelligence. Stick around till after this sponsored break. What comes next might just prove that some curses aren't ancient. They're still being written. In 2021, a group of researchers at a European university fed hundreds of death-related texts into a neural network to see what kind of poetry it could generate. They weren't expecting anything dangerous. The experiment was academic. The goal was to explore the emotional output of artificial intelligence. But the poem it produced, titled Drowned in Ink, was unlike anything they had seen. It was coherent, melancholic, and disturbingly evocative. The tone was cold yet poetic, like something written by a presence that understood suffering but had never felt it. 3 of the researchers who read it aloud experienced strange symptoms within 48 hours. One reported hearing voices. Another suffered a nervous breakdown. The lead researcher deleted the file and issued a statement. Some things are better left unwritten. The AI-generated poem has since become an underground curiosity. Copies exist only in memory, and perhaps that's where it should stay. Because maybe the future of cursed poetry isn't ancient. Maybe it's algorithmic. Maybe the next verse that haunts us won't be written by human hands at all. Are cursed poems just stories, coincidences strung together like stanzas in a forgotten rhyme? Or do certain words carry power far beyond what we understand? Power to twist the soul, to tempt the mind, to trap those who dare speak them aloud. Whatever the answer, maybe it's best not to read everything you find in an old library. Maybe some pages are meant to stay closed, and maybe, just maybe, the next time a poem warns you to stop reading, you should listen. If you enjoyed this episode of the Enchanted Archives, follow us on Instagram, Threads, TikTok, X, and Facebook. And don't forget, the full episode is also available on YouTube with Arabic subtitles. Share it with someone who loves ancient mystery, or someone who thinks curses are just bedtime stories. When you find us, leave a comment or a sign you were here. I like it when people leave breadcrumbs. This episode of the Enchanted Archives was written, produced, and narrated by me, Ahmed Mansour, with research by Samar al-Murali. If you'd prefer to explore the archives without interruptions, you can subscribe to the Enchanted Archives on Apple Podcasts for an ad-free experience. It keeps the stories flowing and the silence intact. For now, see you next time and stay spooky.